Hi, I'm Cam Weiland, and welcome to this week's Writing Q&A video. This week's question is from Ada Panda. I've been going through the character archetypes and really looking at where my characters fit in. One thing I began to wonder, though, is how do the flat archetypes fit into the want, need, fear setup? There seems to be plenty of ways a character or person in general could still have these despite going through a transformative arc. But it seems like these fears won't get in the way of the truth they've now learned. So I was curious if flat archetypes can even be mapped onto want, need, fear in context of the plot or in relation to other characters. I am assuming that flat archetypes will tend to hold a truth, as you've noted before. Any advice on creating deeper character setups with the flat archetype? So what is being referred to here specifically is the flat archetypes that I've talked about in my most recent book, Writing Archetypal Character Arcs. And in my previous book, Creating Character Arcs, I've talked about how to create a flat character arc. So a transformative or positive change character arc is one in which a character will experience a thematic conflict between a lie or limiting perspective of themselves or the world around them versus a more expanded truth that will allow them to act more effectively and proactively within the needs of the story and either meet the goal that they're seeking throughout, or at some point realize that the goal that they're seeking is counterproductive, in which case they would switch gears. So this is actually something that I'm going to be talking about more thoroughly in the future next year on my website. I want to talk a little bit more about flat arcs in a post or perhaps a little series of posts. But for today, I'm going to try to do this really quickly so that it doesn't turn into an hour-long masterclass. But fundamentally, the differences between a positive change arc and a flat arc is that in a positive change arc, the character isn't yet in possession of the perspective or the truth that will allow them to be most productive within the realm of the story world and what they're seeking within it. Whereas in a flat arc, the protagonist will be a character who is already in possession of the story's primary thematic truth, which allows them to be productive and proactive in the story. But the conflict in a flat archetype is largely externalized. So in a positive change arc, you have a protagonist who is very much experiencing this inner conflict between lie and truth as they're working on a transformation into this more expanded mindset out of the lie and into the truth. But as I talk about in my book about archetypes, really you can see that the flat character arc is one in which the protagonist has already completed a change arc, whatever that may be, whether it's archetypal or just general, and that their own personal transformation has brought them to an understanding of the story's central truth. So they're not experiencing that inner conflict between, is this right? Is this not right? Is it worth changing? That kind of thing. But because they are still living in a story world in which other characters and perhaps society at large has not yet embraced this new, more expanded perspective, that lie then becomes externalized onto the story world and the external conflict. And in a nutshell, you can think of a flat arc story as one in which the protagonist doesn't change, but they are able to use their knowledge of the truth, whether it's through actual teaching or just by example, to change the world around them, to create change arcs in the supporting characters. So within this understanding of the differences between change and a change arc and a flat arc, we can see that both stories do possess lie and truth, but that in a change arc, that lie and truth is very much a part of the protagonist's inner conflict, whereas in a flat arc, as I say, it's externalized onto the external plot. This doesn't mean that the flat arc protagonist doesn't have inner conflict. I mean, you can play it so that they don't. Lots of action movies do that, where the hero is just sure that they're right and they just move through the story world. But there's still lots of room for depth and exploration of a character's inner conflict, because realistically, this is still a human being in the human experience, and we are all always experiencing those nuances. But one of the most pertinent ways to explore that inner conflict in a flat arc is through the idea of doubt, right? So this character already is in possession of the truth. It's not a discovery of them for them. They're not going to discover the truth. But, as one does, when they're confronted by, all of this external conflict that represents the lie, there's doubt. There's room to explore further nuances of the truth. Did they get it right? Do they really have the truth? And I think there's room to create really beautiful stories of honesty and responsibility, because that's life. Whenever we think that we have the truth, there's always a danger in that. Maybe we do have a more expanded perspective than the world around us at any given moment, but maybe we don't. And so that doubt is what keeps us honest, and it allows also, just as I say, to work through the nuances, because it's not as cut and dried. The truth and the lie, they're not as cut and dried in real life as perhaps we're able to make them within episodic fiction. So doubling down on kind of the doubt and exploring that is really kind of the parallel for the flat archetype character versus that inner conflict between the lie and the truth that we find in the positive change arc character. So when it comes to want and need, obviously a flat arc character will still have wants and needs. The want, archetypally speaking, within the terms of character arc, refers specifically to a desire that is based on the limited perspective of the lie. So it may or may not be a problematic desire in itself. It may indeed be the main plot goal that will be achieved by the end of the story. But the motivations that the character has for wanting it and seeking it will be driven, in a positive change arc, will be driven to some extent by their belief in the lie in the beginning of the story, and that will evolve as they go. And the need, basically, at its simplest, is simply the truth. What the character needs is the truth within the parameters of the story. So in a flat arc story, obviously the character, the protagonist, already has the truth. So they have what they need. But really that need then becomes externalized in their need to share that truth and see its effects on the world around them and in inspiring change arcs for supporting characters. This doesn't mean like they have to be an evangelist for the truth and go out, and try to convert all the other characters to seeing it their way. But the very fact that this is a cause that they believe in, that they know is right, that's going to drive all their actions, and their need is to see that truth actualized within the external world of the story. And the want is really something that as far as it being like a limited desire that's based upon the lie, that's really something that, again, we see externalized onto the external world and the supporting characters. And very often you can purposely create one specific supporting character. It could be, someone who's kind of antagonistic to the protagonist, but very often it's an ally, it's a friend, it's someone who's representing kind of the pain points of the lie and the reasons why this is something that's worth kind of fighting against, worth overcoming, worth the protagonist making a stand for, in whatever context that may be within your story. So these basic principles of the flat character arc will translate directly over into the specifics of the flat archetypes if you're working with those. So within the system that I talk about in my book, Writing Archetypal Character Arcs, there are 6 transformative change arcs that create the backbone of the life cycle of character arcs that we can see humans working their way throughout their lifetimes. And those would be the maiden, the hero, the queen, the king, the crone, and the mage. But then kind of in between each of those change arcs is you can think of it sort of as a resting period in which the character isn't being challenged to make these huge leaps into new perspectives and new truths, but in which they are in possession of the truth from the previous transformative arc that they just went through. And those flat archetypes would be the child, the lover, the parent, the ruler, the elder, and the mentor. So if you are wanting to work with one of those flat archetypes specifically, you can totally just map the generalities of the flat character arc and its structure and its principles directly onto that. But like I said, this is something I really want to explore a little bit more in some posts and podcasts next year. Specifically, just the power and the majesty that is the flat arc and how important it is. We put such an emphasis on the importance of change, particularly in the idea of the character arc, which is crucial. You know, we need to be willing and able to face those transformative initiations within our lives in order to grow. But you have to have something to grow out of too. I like this idea that you cannot transcend the status quo until you have mastered the status quo. So the flat archetype periods are really about mastering that status quo, mastering the new status quo that you've come into, the new truths that you've earned. And yes, they're limited perspectives, and eventually you'll grow out of them too, but you can't reach that next stage until you've fully integrated and mastered the one you're in. And that is essentially the inner landscape of what a flat arc character is experiencing during a story. So I hope that quickie was helpful. I will put lots more resources about character arcs and archetypes in the comments. If you have a question you'd like me to answer next week, please leave that in the comments. And if you'd like to stay in touch with me and keep up with all the content that I produce, whether it's these short videos or the lengthy articles and podcasts that I post every week on my website, the best way to do that is to sign up for my mailing list at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. I will see you again next week.